Hey, how's everybody doing this morning? My name is Josh. I'm the Weekend Services Director here at ALC, and I'm super excited to share with you guys a little bit today as we're in this series, Summer at ALC. But before we jump into any of that, will you guys do me a favor? Will you help me out? We want to greet everybody that's with us online, everybody up in Peru. Can you put your hands together for them? It's pretty awesome to be a part of a church where we're having an impact. We're making an impact in different communities and all over the place. So we're so excited that you guys are with us. We are going to continue today in our series, Summer at ALC. And I don't know if you guys have picked up on this or not, but this summer series that we're doing is kind of a collection of things that don't fit into a lot of other series, like kind of a standalone thing here or there, but things that we still think are very, very important. And so we're kind of going through these things and working through some of this stuff in this series. And I feel super blessed to be able to share with you guys today. And so it is 4th of July weekend, so I understand if you're a little bit tired. I feel like I'm a little bit tired. Any of you guys have like crazy fireworks in your neighborhood like this weekend, last night? Yeah? Like, I don't know if I'm like not part of the group or what, but like my whole subdivision apparently has agreed at like 10:30 every night for what seems like forever. They're all gonna go out into the street and just set off fireworks for as long as they possibly can. I don't really know. I don't know why I'm not included in that. But like even this morning, woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to fireworks going off. And I'm not a guy that goes to bed really early, but I'm like 4 in the morning. What are you doing? But anyways, maybe I don't want to know. So we're gonna start out. We're gonna start out with the easy thing here to get us started here. We're gonna start out with the easiest statement that I think you'll ever see in a message at Abundant Life Church. Okay, this is super simple. I want to share this with you. I think it will all make sense. God's plan is better than yours. Okay, this is pretty simple. This is pretty basic, okay? God's plan is better than yours. And I think that we all can agree with that. And I think sitting here, we're all like, yeah, absolutely. But I don't think we always put that in practice in our life, okay? So I'll tell you a really quick story just about me. I struggle with this at times. Long time ago, in the mid-2000s, I was with a church, a small church, and some of my good friends, we were having a conversation at their house. They were leaving to go work at a church in another community, and our church had decided they were going to make a standalone, dedicated youth pastor position for the first time. Okay, so it was like a youth pastor position, and I had been involved with the student ministry in the way it was structured and the way it was working, and my friends are like, you need to apply for this job. And my wife and I are sitting there, we're kind of at their dining room table, and we're having this conversation. And I disagreed with them. I did not think I should apply for that job, and I didn't think that I should be a youth pastor. I actually had went to school for mechanical engineering. I had a different plan for my life. I was doing different things. And this conversation ended with me slamming my hand on the table, saying, if God wants me to be a youth pastor, the church is going to have to come to me because I am not going to apply for this job. And that is where it wrapped up, and we left. And like a few weeks later, my wife and I were going to a meeting. We were putting a plan together. We were going to put a job description together for the youth pastor. We were helping with all of that. And when we got there were two elders on the porch of the folks' house that we were meeting at. And as we walked up, they stopped us and we were talking, and they said, hey, before we start doing this, we just want to let you know we would actually prefer to just hire you for the youth pastor's position and not post the job. And instantly I was like, oh, like, why did I say that, right? Like, but see, what I didn't realize, it's not that I didn't realize it. What I wasn't willing to accept was that God's plan was better than mine, right? I had this idea of what my life was going to look like. I had this idea of what I was going to do, and it just didn't line up with this idea of ministry, right? So I didn't buy in initially. I did take the job, and it's been 18 years of awesome ever since. I'm so thankful that God moved me into that role. I've been able to do a lot of fun stuff, a lot of great ministry, meet a lot of amazing people. But if I wouldn't have accepted that God's plan was better than my plan for my life, I never would have got there. And yeah, there were some conversations along the way. It's kind of hard to explain to people like why you leave like engineering for youth pastor, and there's a lot of things that go into that. But if you can accept that God's plan is better than yours, if you can accept that, some really great things can happen. And it turns out that I was actually in pretty good company. I didn't know that, but there is a guy in the Bible. His life is talked about at length in the Old Testament. We're going to look at a lot of scripture from the book of Exodus today. There's this guy in the Bible named Moses, okay? Now, I hope you're at least vaguely familiar with Moses. We can't cover all of that today, but Moses is going to get called back to Egypt to try to help get God's people released from Egyptian slavery, okay? That's the foundation here. But I want you guys to see this exchange. I want you guys to hear this exchange that Moses has with God when God's telling him he has to go back to Egypt. It says in Exodus chapter 4, it says, "But Moses said to the Lord, 'O my Lord, I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you've spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue.' Then the Lord said to him, 'Who's made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak.'" So Moses isn't quite sure that God's plan is better. God says, yes, it is, but Moses doesn't stop there. He goes on and he says, "But he said, 'O my Lord, please send someone else.' Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, 'Is there not Aaron your brother the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth, I will be with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do.'" So God said, I don't care that you don't think my plan is better than yours. You're going to do this. I'm going to send you some help. You and Aaron are going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to get my people free from slavery, okay? And so Moses, somewhat reluctantly, but he decides that God's plan is better, and he moves into action on this. And we have this whole part of the book of Exodus talking about the plagues, right? God brings 10 plagues to Israel. You guys familiar with this a little bit? Some of you, maybe? He brings 10 plagues on Egypt, not on Israel, on Egypt, to encourage Pharaoh to let his people go. And we're not going to read through every one of those at length. We need like 6 hours. We can't do that. So I'm going to establish just a couple things with you real quick in case you're not as familiar. In every one of these plagues, there's a pattern, okay? God says, go to Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, and they say, hey, let the Israelites go. Those are God's people. Let them go, or else God's going to bring this plague, whatever it is. And Pharaoh says, no. God brings the plague. Pharaoh says, whoops, maybe I need to go back to these guys and see if I can get some help. He tells them, if you get rid of the plague, I'll let the people go. They get rid of the plague. God gets rid of the plague. Pharaoh changes his mind. He doesn't let the people go. Okay? That's the pattern time and time again. We're not going to talk about that every time. But that is the pattern here. And what we're going to do is we are going to look at 10 simple lessons we can learn from the 10 plagues, okay? So we're going to move through these plagues pretty quick. But you got to remember, you got to keep in context here that Moses has decided, he has agreed to the fact that God's plan is better than his. But it's interesting because Pharaoh really struggles to learn that lesson. So we're going to start with the first plague. The first plague, the Nile River turns to blood. Okay, so Moses goes to Pharaoh, he does all this, and Pharaoh doesn't care, and so God turns the Nile River to blood. All the water in Egypt, he turns to blood. It says in the Bible, it says that all the fish die. It says that the land stunk because of it, and you can imagine, all the fish in all the waters are dying. To me, this would freak me out. I think I would be absolutely alarmed, scared, terrified. I'm not exactly sure what I would do, but I want to share with you a passage from Exodus chapter 7 of how Pharaoh responded to this, okay? So in Exodus chapter 7, it says, "But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart." So Pharaoh has these magicians. He's got his buddies, right? These are his guys. And they're like, let me see if we can do this. So they take some water. They turn it to blood. Pharaoh's like, if these guys can do this, you can do it too. It's not a big deal. He just goes back inside. Okay? Pharaoh, he didn't even care. It wasn't a big deal. If his buddies can do it, then surely Moses and Aaron can do it, whatever, not a big deal. So our quick lesson here, our quick takeaway from this plague, Pharaoh didn't pay attention. You should pay attention when God does something in your life, right? If something's happening around you and you're not quite sure what's going on, you don't know, you can't explain it, or you know that it's the thing of God, you should pay attention to that. I think that seems very obvious. I think that everybody sitting here would agree, oh yeah, if God's moving in my life, I should pay attention. I don't know that we always do it. I know that Pharaoh didn't do it. If Pharaoh would have done it and would have paid attention, maybe this rest of the passage of Scripture we're going to look at today wouldn't have been there, right? Because the story would be different. But Pharaoh did not pay attention. Pharaoh did not let the people go after they got rid of the plague and the Nile River was turned back to water. So we have the second plague of frogs. Okay, so this time Pharaoh doesn't care. He's like, bring it on, whatever. So the frogs come. And now we're not talking about like there's some frogs in your backyard and they get loud at night, right? They're not talking about like when you're walking along the stream, you see that little quick guy that shoots into the water and scares you a little bit. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody else? You know what I'm saying? You're walking along the water and you just see that and you're like, was that a snake? Nope, just frog. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, it says in the Bible, it says there are frogs everywhere. They came up out of the Nile River. They're like filling the streets. They're filling your house. It says they're in your ovens. They're in your bread bowls. They're like all over you, okay? Can you imagine like you're getting up in the morning, you're like getting ready to do your thing. You go to put your shoe on and you're like just that, like, I think about how that would feel, right? Like frogs everywhere. So this is not like, oh yeah, there's a couple extra frogs. This is like tons of frogs all over you. Like right now, sitting here in this room like a frog, chilling on your shoulder, a couple crawling across the floor. Not my idea of a good time, right? Not something I'm excited about. So Pharaoh realizes this. He calls to Moses and Aaron. He says, hey, I was wrong. Take the plague away. I'll let the people go. And I want to show you something that happens. There's this exchange between Moses and Pharaoh, and I want to read this to you in Exodus chapter 8. Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you, and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile. So Moses says, hey, just so we're clear, this time, you tell me when to pray to God, so you know without a doubt that God took the frogs away. Okay, because one of the things we didn't read, Pharaoh's buddies again, they called frogs out of the water too. So the magicians could do it. So, maybe Pharaoh's thinking, well, if my guys can do it, you guys can probably do it too. So Moses says, no, I want you to know for sure that this is God. So you tell me when to do it. You know what Pharaoh said? It goes on in the very next verse. And he said, tomorrow. Frog on my shoulder, no big deal. He can stay. Frog on my pillow, it's cool. Frogs everywhere. We're going to hang on to those frogs just for one more night. We're going to just have one more night with the frogs. Now, we could spend a whole lot of time just on this little scenario here because I think it's very real. There's a lot of people who have taught on this idea of the frogs and just what Pharaoh was after here. Pharaoh, for some reason, wanted one more night with those frogs. Like me, I'm like, get rid of the frogs now. Right? Like right now, like my shoe is gross now. Get rid of the frogs. Like get them out of here, right? Pharaoh says tomorrow. And I think the lesson to be learned in this, I think there's a lesson to be learned in this because I think so many of us kind of struggle with this. Our quick takeaway here, it's kind of a big one. I'm going to be honest. This one's kind of a big one. It says, Pharaoh wanted one more night. You should get rid of your frogs, okay? You should get rid of them now. Like, don't wait. And when I say frogs, I think you guys all understand this. I'm not talking about, like, your pet frog. I'm talking about those things in your life that are in the way of what God is calling you to. You already know what they are. Pharaoh already knew the frogs were not great, right? It wasn't a good time to have frogs everywhere. But he was wanting to hold on to them, right? And I think we want to hold on to our frogs sometimes as well. Like, for whatever reason. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's something that we like to do. Like, I know when I was... I didn't grow up in the church, so like when I was like 18, I gave my life to Christ when I was 18. So for 18 years, all of my friends were not church-going people necessarily, right? They weren't practicing the things that God calls us to practice. They weren't doing those things. And so like a lot of them were like the guys who were like, yeah, on Friday night I'm going to do my thing. On Sunday I'm going to go to church and fix it, right? But then the next Friday comes around, they're going to do their thing. Sunday morning comes around, they're going to fix it, they're not going to do it again. Friday night comes around, right? And I think we fall into this pattern of not wanting to let go of our frogs. Pharaoh didn't want to get rid of his frogs. We fall into that same trap. So that's the quick lesson here. Pharaoh didn't learn. Did Pharaoh let the people go? No, that's all you got. Peru, I hope you were better than that. Did Pharaoh let the people go? No. So was there another plague? There was. Third plague. This plague is gnats. Gnats are one of the most annoying insects on the planet, in my opinion, right? There's like mosquitoes, and right next to them is their cousin, the gnat, okay? I don't really know if they're cousins. But they're just annoying, right? Has anybody there was a few days, a couple, like in the last like week or two where it was like really humid and there were gnats everywhere. Did anybody experience this? Like Go out in the backyard, gnats everywhere. This plague was not like that. Like, this wasn't just like gnats in your backyard. This is like gnats everywhere. They're like in your houses. They're everywhere. They're driving you crazy. They're driving everyone and everything crazy. And it's interesting to me because Pharaoh's buddies have a different experience with this plague than the first two. So the magicians, they have this different experience. I want to share this with you. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. So now his buddies, who so far have been able to kind of repeat the same thing, maybe on a smaller scale, but they've been able to repeat what Moses and Aaron have said God is doing. In this third plague, in the plague of gnats, they're not able to do that. And so they say to Pharaoh, they're like, "Pharaoh, bro, like this is not something we can do. You need to pay attention to this a little bit. Like, this is God. This is not a parlor trick. This is a big thing. Be aware. This is clearly God," right? Pharaoh didn't care. He didn't listen, right? That's our takeaway here. Pharaoh's buddies called it, right? They're like, "Dude, this is God. This is a big deal. This is a thing." Pharaoh didn't listen. You should listen to the people that you trust in your life, okay? Pharaoh chose not to do that. Now, I'll give you a quick example. I know a lot of you are sitting here right now with like family members or your spouse or whatever the case may be. I want you to think for just a minute like you're out to dinner with your people, right? And like in my instance, my wife, my 3 kids were at dinner, and my wife Jessica would look at me and she says, hey, kind of leans into the table a little bit. Clearly she doesn't want to shout this. And she's like, "Hey, you got something," right? She's doing one of those. Have you guys experienced this? And what she's trying to do is discreetly tell me that there's like something very gross in my teeth, right? I have 2 choices in that moment. I can trust her that there is something there in my teeth and I can do something about it. Or I can act like nothing is happening and ignore it, right? I don't know what you do and how you handle that in your situation. Some people are just like, "I got it." They go after it. Some people go to the bathroom and get that out, whatever the case may be. But you should listen to those people in your life. I'll tell you a really quick side note. I was gonna explain that with like somebody saying that your fly's unzipped, but I was super paranoid that somehow my fly would be unzipped and I would call attention to it. So I didn't use that. I haven't said that in any other service, but I was really nervous that somehow something crazy would happen. It'd be really embarrassing. But like these people in your life that you trust, maybe that's the people you're here with today. Maybe that's one of the pastors on staff here at ALC. Maybe that's somebody in your life group. Those people are in your life for a reason. They are trusted allies. They are people that you should trust and listen to and consider their opinions. Pharaoh didn't do that. So did he let the people go? No. So there's another plague, 4th plague. This one is flies. Now I have a theory here. There's like a 0.0001% chance that maybe Pharaoh was like, maybe there will be a plague of flies. I should keep these frogs, right? Now, I don't think that's the case, but in my head, there's a chance, right? But no, so Pharaoh brings, or not Pharaoh, God brings a plague of flies, okay? Have you ever had a fly in your house? Just one, right? And you hear it, tap, 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 in the window, right? It gets up behind the blinds. Everybody knows what I'm talking about here, right? And in my house, it gets a little bit worse because I have this cat who thinks he's going to be the hero and save the day from the vicious fly. So he starts like tearing things up, knocking things off the tables, jumping into the blinds, right? Like one fly can be annoying, but this plague is not one fly in your house. This is flies covering everything, the walls of your house, your face, like flies everywhere. I connected this dot. If you think about like flies all over the inside of your car in the summer, and then it gets really hot and they all die, so you have all these flies in your, like, this is a lot of flies, okay? Super gross. But God does something slightly different here. And there's a lesson we can learn here from this plague that I want to show you this because that's what we're doing. Our 10 quick takeaways from 10 plagues. In Exodus chapter 8, it says, God says, "But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen." And this is not Goshen, Indiana, if you're familiar with northern Indiana. That's the area I grew up. Not Goshen, Indiana. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen. So now this time God's like, hey, if you don't realize that this is me and not something else, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you the difference between your people, the Egyptians, and my people, the Israelites. So the flies are not the flies. They're not going to impact. The flies are not going to impact the Israelites. Okay? Now I think the reality here is that when God tells Pharaoh this, he kind of opens a door. All right? He kind of opens the door because he says, hey, listen, you're going to see the difference. These people, they got something going on that these people don't. If you're on the right side of this thing, these plagues are not a problem for you. If you're pursuing the things of God, if you're in line with me, the plagues would not affect you. Here's our quick takeaway. Pharaoh wasn't open to the possibilities. You should consider doors that God opens. Okay? God opened a door to Pharaoh. He's like, hey, if you aren't sure, look at my people. No flies. No annoyance, no cat in the blinds. Look at your people, losing their mind, flies everywhere, can't even sit on the couch because the flies are driving you crazy. There is something different here. Consider this. Right? Consider the possibility, and Pharaoh refused. In your life, you should consider what happens when God opens a door for you, okay? You should just think through that a little bit. Did Pharaoh let the people go? He did not let the people go. He did not consider the possibility. He did not consider what God could do in his life. And I think that sometimes we struggle with this as people. I know sometimes I struggle with this too. Like sometimes God is opening a door for me to do something, right? And I often know this. I feel this. Whether it's to me it's the Holy Spirit. It's some kind of conviction. God's saying, do this, right? So think of a simple example. Maybe you feel led to go introduce yourself to a stranger and strike up a conversation with them, right? Now, in my world, I'm going to go do that, and it's not a problem, and it seems pretty easy. And I'm going to do that because I don't really know why I feel compelled to do that, so I feel like it's got to be God, so I'm going to go do it. But that is not a simple task for anyone. Are there any introverts here? None? Maybe one? Maybe two? You know why? It's because they don't raise their hands, right? They don't want to be noticed. They don't want you to see them because they like to stay in the background. They like to observe. They like to do their thing, right? If you're a very introverted person and God's telling you, go introduce yourself to this stranger, that could be very, very challenging. But what we have to do is be open to the possibility that God's going to do something with that relationship, that God's going to do something through that conversation. And Pharaoh didn't do that. We don't always do that, but we need to be open to the possibilities when God opens doors in our lives. But Pharaoh didn't do it. There is another plague. This one is sad. Fifth plague, death of livestock. If you are a big animal fan, this is sad, and I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. So like if you're a big fan of like cows or goats or chickens, some of the goats and chickens are dying in this scenario, okay? So what God does is he says, hey, listen, if you're not going to let the people go, I am going to kill livestock of all of the people, right? So your cows, your chickens, your goats, whatever it is that you raise. I don't know what they raised on a farm in Egypt. I don't know that. But so that's his plan. But he kind of raises the bar a little bit here in some of this, right? This is a little bit bigger deal. This is going to affect people's livelihood. It's going to affect the way they raise money, or the way they earn money. It's going to affect the food that they have, all these kind of things. But God says this. It says in Exodus 9, it says, but the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing of all that belongs to the people of Israel shall die. And the Lord set a time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And the next day, the Lord did this thing, right? I just like the way that's worded there. He just did this thing, right? Like, so he wipes out some of their livestock. But he doesn't wipe out any of the livestock of the Israelites, right? So now, there's like an economic balance in this, right? There's like a livelihood. There's a thing here. Listen, if you don't get on the same page with me, if you don't accept that my plan is better than yours, like, there are consequences that aren't affecting my people, but they're affecting your people. Like, look, he's trying to show this, that there is a difference between these two groups of people, and Pharaoh is just struggling to buy in, right? And here is our takeaway. Pharaoh was committed to his crowd. He was committed to the Egyptians and the practices that they had and the beliefs that they had that weren't the belief in God. You should make sure you're in the right crowd, right? This is a good starting point. Right now, you are with a good crowd right now. You are in church, you are with a good crowd. That is a good place to start. But sometimes when we walk out of here, the crowd that we are with does not look like the crowd that we are with when we are in here. Right, I was telling you guys, I wasn't raised in the church, right? I had some of this struggles. I give my life to Christ, and for the next several years, I'm trying to live a life with a foot in both camps, right? My best friends on the planet, the only people I've ever known, are not doing things that I can do, or they're doing things that I can't do, right? If I'm going to pursue the things of God, I can't pursue these things anymore. And that is a very challenging situation, right? So you need to make sure that you're in the right crowd. And if you're not, I can tell you, without a doubt, you can change the crowd you're with, and it will be okay, and some of the crowd you left will figure it out, and they might come with you, okay? So consider that. Make sure you're in the right crowd. Did Pharaoh consider that he was in the wrong crowd? He didn't. Did he let the people go? He didn't. There's another plague. Sixth plague is the plague of boils. Okay, so boils are like sores on your body, right? They're like kind of like a blister that's opened up and kind of sore and hurts, and it's painful, right? Like I think about like as a kid when you get like a new pair of shoes and you put them on and you run around in them all day and you get like the big blister on your heel. Imagine those all over your body. That's what's happening here. Okay, it is painful. It is uncomfortable. God is saying, okay, we're gonna take this up another notch here. And Pharaoh's buddies, the magicians, they come back into our narrative here. They come back in the scripture. And I want to share this with you because if you remember, at first they were going toe-to-toe, right? Yeah, we can turn water to blood. We can call frogs. Whoa, wait a minute. We can't make gnats. Now there's another layer to that story, okay? In Exodus chapter 9, it says, "And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils came upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses." So at this point, Pharaoh's people, his buddies, the magicians, the guys that he kind of trusts, the people around him, they're not even going to deal with Moses anymore. They're like, we're done with these guys. We're not going to stand in front of them. Pharaoh, you are on your own. We got to take care of ourselves. There is a problem here, and we cannot invest any more effort into trying to fix this if you're not willing to put any effort into trying to fix this, okay? They've recognized that something is wrong, and they're bailing, right? They're like, I'm out. What did Pharaoh do? He stuck to his guns, right? He dug in maybe a little harder. He refuses. Our takeaway here, simple one, Pharaoh couldn't admit when he was wrong. You should accept being wrong. Here is a public service announcement. In the next 2 minutes, if you are sitting next to your spouse, you need to be careful. Okay? We have discussions in my house, right? I've been told unequivocally that I need to call them discussions, right? So we would never have an argument in my house. We just have discussions, okay? But sometimes in one of these discussions, I am pretty confident that I am right? And when I have this moment, when I have this epiphany that I am right, I am committed to winning one, right? I don't need to win a lot. I just would like to win occasionally, right? Like I just want to win a discussion once in a while. So I might dig in a little harder. I might be a little more committed to the effort, right? You guys, anybody ever done this? No, don't raise your hands if you're sitting next to your spouse. I said, be careful. But sometimes it's good to feel like you're right. So you might go a little farther than you should. Maybe I do this, maybe you don't. But sometimes you might go a little farther than you should in an effort to win, right? And somewhere along the line, you might realize you were wrong, right? But what do? You're all in at that point, right? You're going. You're committed, okay? This never ends well for me, just for clarity. and I'm not right near as often as I think I'm going to be right. So we can learn from this. Pharaoh didn't learn from this. We should do better. If I would just accept when I'm wrong sometimes, life would be better for me. See, now I get to go home and have lunch, and I get to be told of the things that I am also wrong about right now, right? That's the way this works. Like, Pharaoh just couldn't admit that he was wrong. It's okay to think that you're right, but as soon as you recognize that you are not, you need to correct yourself. You need to make a change. Pharaoh didn't do that. Pharaoh didn't let the people go. Seventh plague. Seventh plague was hail. Hail's not that bad. Now, but it tells us in the Bible, if you read this, and I'd encourage you to, but if you read this, it says that God's going to send hail, and anything that's left out in the fields, is going to be wiped out by this hail. So I'm like, that's crazy. Like, what kind of hail does it take? Is that like a real thing? Can I see that, or can I experience that? Like, what does it take from hail to injure or kill a person? So it turns out this happens. I didn't really know this. This happens somewhat regularly in our world. Even in America, it's happened recently in the last 10 or 12 years, where there will be a serious hailstorm that the hail is so big that it causes injury and death. Do you know how big the hail needs to be to kill a human? What I found out is hail the size of an orange or a grapefruit. That is a chunk of ice, man. That is crazy. But in this scenario, God kind of went even farther, and he said, it's going to kill the livestock if they're out in the fields. I don't know if there's any farmers here. This has been validated in some of the services. I wasn't sure about this, but as a kid, I remember growing up around farmers. I grew up in a farm town, and I remember them telling me that a cow's head is incredibly strong. That's why, if a cow's doing something you don't want it to do, you'll see, a farmer just, hit it in the head with a 2x4 or something. Hit it in the head, because it doesn't even faze them. It's just oh, hey, wait, what was that? Actually, one of the things I was told is that you can take a .22 caliber rifle and shoot a cow in the head, and it won't do anything but cut the skin a little bit, because that's how hard their skull is. So in this context, if you think about that, and if that's not true and I'm lying to you, I apologize. I admit that I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't know. If you think about that, though, hail that's going to do that kind of damage to a cow is going to have to be considerably larger than a grapefruit, right? We're talking big chunks of ice. And this thing kind of happens as it's been happening, But there is a progress. There's some progression in what's going on in this plague. And Moses and Aaron have told Pharaoh about this. And Pharaoh's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm not going to let the people go. But there is something different. And I want to read this to you guys. I want you guys to hear this because it's significant. And it says, behold, about this time, this is God talking, it says, behold, about this time tomorrow I will cause very heavy hail to fall, such as never been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Now therefore, send, get your livestock and all that you have in the field into safe shelter. And it keeps going, and it says, for every man and beast that is in the field and is not brought home will die when the hail falls on them. Then whoever feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh hurried his slaves and his livestock into the houses, but whoever did not pay attention to the word of the Lord left his slaves and his livestock in the field. So now some of the Egyptian folks, some of Pharaoh's buddies are saying, okay, so God said there were going to be frogs, and there were frogs, and God said there were going to be gnats, and there were gnats, and there were flies, and there's all these things. Maybe I should pay attention to the idea that there is going to be giant hail that is going to kill everything that I have. And they take some precautions. Now, not everybody took precautions. Not everybody didn't consider what could happen. But there are some Egyptians who have started to consider this. And this is our takeaway here. Pharaoh did not weigh the risk of what could happen. You should always be on the scale. Okay? When something is going on in your life, when you feel led to do something that God's calling you to do, when you think that maybe God's plan might be better than yours, you need to be on the scale, and you need to consider what could happen if you pursue what God's calling you to do, and you should consider what happens if you don't pursue what God is calling you to do. So say you're called to introduce yourself to somebody new. You could do it right after service, just so you know, because I don't think that everyone here knows everyone in this room. Say you're called to kind of strike up a conversation with somebody. You don't know the impact that could have in your life or in that person's life. You don't know what God could be calling you to. Okay, so you need to consider that against what could happen if you don't. Pharaoh didn't do that. He didn't do that, but some of his people, some of his friends, some of the Egyptians started to consider it. Pharaoh didn't. Did Pharaoh let the people go, guys? No. So another plague, such as life, I guess. 8th plague, plague of locusts. So God is going to send locusts. They are going to eat everything. They are going to tear the place up. It's going to make it hard to eat when you don't have food because the crops are ruined, right? Locusts are going to go crazy all over the place. Just as many locusts as there were flies and gnats and frogs. Just an abundance of these things tearing the place up, okay? I would be upset. If I lived in Egypt, I would be mad at Pharaoh because he's letting my place get wrecked. He could do something different here. This time with this plague of locusts, with this impact that it's going to have on Egypt, Pharaoh maybe is starting to figure some things out here. Maybe not. Maybe he is. I want to share with this. We've moved into Exodus 10 here. This is after the locusts are tearing the place up. It says, "Then Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron and said, 'I've sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore forgive my sin, please, only this once, and plead with the Lord your God only to remove this death from me.'" So Pharaoh's saying, okay, it has taken 8 plagues. I'm a little slow to the party, but maybe I'm doing something wrong. If y'all could help me out, that would be great, okay? And I think that what's going on here is that Pharaoh needed to learn something that he hasn't learned yet, that I learned in my life. I learned from a really wise man. His name was Michael Scott. Anybody Office fans? There's an episode of The Office. Michael Scott tells Dwight Schrute, "Do not be an idiot." And if you're familiar with The Office, it then cuts to a scene of Dwight sitting in front of the camera, kind of monologuing with the camera, and he says, "That was very good advice. Anytime I'm going to do something, I ask myself, would an idiot do this thing? And if the answer is yes, I do not do that thing." Okay? This makes a ton of sense, okay? I've put that into practice in my life. Anytime something's not working right or things aren't doing what I expect them to do or I can't accomplish a goal that I'm trying to accomplish, my first filter is, am I being an idiot? Because most likely, I am making a mistake, I'm doing something wrong, I need to step back and I need to consider that before I move forward, right? This is our takeaway here. Pharaoh was an idiot even when he knew he was an idiot. You should not be an idiot. You should correct yourself, okay? Pharaoh knew he was doing something wrong. He recognized maybe his decisions weren't right, and maybe there was something to this God thing that Moses and Aaron were talking about. He even said, hey, maybe you can forgive me this time, just this once. Let's get this right, and then I'll let the people go. So he's had this moment where he's thinking, maybe there's something here. So he kind of bargains with them. They go to God. The locusts leave. Does he let the people go? Nope. So even though he knew at this point, right? In my mind, he knew he was making some bad decisions. He wasn't willing to correct himself, which brings the 9th plague. The 9th plague is the plague of darkness, okay? So it tells us in the Bible that there's going to be this darkness over the whole land of Egypt. And I just want to share this with you. I want to read this passage to you to kind of explain this specific plague. There's some interesting things about it. And there's some parallels that I think we should take something away from. So in Exodus chapter 10, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. Then they did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all of the people of Israel had light where they lived." So total darkness for 3 days. So dark that you can't see the other people in your house. Okay? Now, I don't know why you would consider that a good thing unless you're super tired and you're like, hey, I can sleep for 3 days. This is fantastic. I don't know what else you're going to, I don't know how you're going to take advantage of that time. It's going to be very frustrating. And I don't know a ton about just pure darkness, but I know this. When you are in a place that is very dark, but there is a place that has light, you can see the light, right? Think about a thunderstorm when your power goes out. Maybe this is just my house, but if the power goes out in my house, we go to the windows, right? Because you're trying to see if the neighbors have power. Did I forget to pay the electric bill? Or what's going on, right? You go and you look and you see what's going on. And if there is light somewhere else, you can see the light. Okay, now there is some serious parallel. We all know that Jesus is the light of the world, right? So if you're seeing Jesus, if you're seeing the light that Jesus brings, like, that should get your attention, right? So in my mind, Pharaoh has this opportunity to see the light that the Israelites have from his total darkness. His darkness, so dark that he can't do anything, right? And so this is our quick takeaway here. Pharaoh never looked for the light. You should get to the light, okay? If you're in that place right now and you're considering, you're feeling maybe God's moving in your life and you haven't made a decision to get the light of Christ in you yet, you haven't made that decision, you should get to the light. Did Pharaoh get to the light? No. Did Pharaoh let the people go? No. Got one more plague. 10th plague, death of the firstborn. Now, this is a little heavy, right? Because what God says is like, he says, okay, we're going to do something. We're going to step it up a notch here. We're going to make this a little bit bigger, and we're going to do something here. And if you don't let the people go, I'm going to send death to all of the firstborn. Firstborn person, firstborn cow, firstborn puppy, firstborn everything, right? And if you don't do this, if you don't get on board, this is going to happen. Pharaoh doesn't care. He's not gonna let the people go. So God instructs the Israelites to do something, right? He has them paint their doorways with blood to mark their house, so that when death comes to all of Egypt, it will pass over the house of the Israelites. This is where we get Passover, and that's a whole conversation we don't have time for today. But when this happens, and the firstborn of everything Egypt has, from person to mouse, it says in the Bible, it says there is a great wail and crying from Egypt. And you can imagine, put a little context. If the firstborn of every household in Kokomo passed away overnight, just that sadness, that deep, heavy sadness. And in the midst of this has happened to Pharaoh, and this is what Pharaoh does. It says, then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night, and he said, up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go serve the Lord, as you've said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you've said, and be gone, and bless me also. Get out, I'm done, go away, stop bringing this to me. I cannot do this anymore. Your God is doing things that I don't understand. Go away, and if you can, bless me on your way out the door, because I need everything I can get, right? He's sending them out, and they go. Now, we know the rest of the story. He actually has a change of heart, right? This is where the Israelites cross the Red Sea, and then and the Egyptians follow them, and God crashes the Red Sea down on them. And we're not getting into any of that today, but here's the problem. It took this point. It took 10 plagues for Pharaoh to wise up. And this is the takeaway here. It says, Pharaoh never changed until he was in chaos. You shouldn't wait for chaos. But this is what we do as people. We have a tendency to not make a change until we have no other path forward, right? You hear these stories, you hear people talk about this. We have a tendency to wait till we're kind of in our worst spot to try to move. You should not do that. You have the ability to avoid that. You have the ability to avoid those chaos moments of your life if you just start to pursue the things of God now. If you start to accept that God's plan is better than yours and you start to move forward toward those things. But here's the problem that I see with this. Here's the problem that I think Pharaoh had. I think this is something that we tend to do also. Pharaoh was making his decisions looking at the past instead of making decisions about what the future could be, okay? Think about it. The first plague, his buddies are like, yeah, we can turn water to blood too, no big deal. And then it happens, and then he's like, well, maybe there's something to this. He talks about it, the plague goes away. The next plague, frogs. Yeah, less than ideal, but he talks to Moses and Aaron, plague goes away. His past is starting to tell him that it doesn't matter if a plague comes, it will be inconvenient, but we can make it go away. He's not considering the future. He's not considering that the plagues could get worse, that they could get bigger, that they could become more personal, that they could affect him in a greater way. He's not looking forward, he's looking backward. And a few years ago, I was taking some classes in college in the Bible, and I came across this quote, and I just want to share this with you as we wrap up. A guy named Peter Matthews wrote this, and it says, a lot of us are having an illicit affair with the past. What about what God wants to do with our future? It starts with making good decisions. And Pharaoh there was a pattern of poor decision making through all of these plagues, right? There was a pattern here over and over again. And I think sometimes we get trapped in those spots because we're looking backward instead of forward. And guys, this is what I'm saying today. If nothing else, this is what I'm saying today. You are not your past. Right? That's a part of who you are. You shouldn't forget it. You should learn from it. but God is calling you to greater things in the future. And if Pharaoh could have wised up, if he could have caught on, if he could have made some better decisions looking to what God could have done in his life, maybe this would have played out a little bit different. And that's kind of my prayer for us today. That's my prayer for people, is that we will start to make decisions looking forward to what God is calling us to instead of the things that we have already been through. So I want to pray for you here in just a second. I just hope that this has been something that you can take away. I know these are all very simple, not complicated. Get rid of your frog, not a complicated concept, right? Like, go to the light, correct yourself when you're wrong. These are all very simple things. But if we'd put these 10 things kind of into practice in our lives, it would change the future that God has for us, right? Because it would redirect us to the path that he has for us instead of the path that we want to create for ourselves. So that's kind of the focus this week. I hope this has been good. I think that over the next 6 months, man, if you just take these and try it, I think your world would look a lot different 6 months from now. So let's pray. God, we just thank you for your word. Lord, we thank you for the direction that it gives us. We thank you that every time we read it, Lord, there is something new to be learned. There is something more to be gleaned that we can apply to our lives, Lord, because that is the blueprint. That is how we build a relationship with you. That's how we know you and your son, Jesus. God, we just thank you so much for that. God, I ask that these things would sink into our hearts, that they would become every day, that they would be everyday practices in our lives. Thank you so much for all the things that you do for us. Thank you for your son, Jesus, and everything that he did. It's in his name we pray. And all God's people said, amen. Can we give the Lord a good clap, man?